Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. And we're back for another episode of Socializing Security. Milou, how are you doing today?
I'm excited to be here. We're here on our anniversary episode, which is a pretty big deal. Year one
Yeah.
of Socializing Security.
Yeah. We dropped our first episode officially on June 4th of 2024. And so we figured we've done a few kind of look backs more at the beginning of 2025, kind of looking back at the year that was. So we don't necessarily want to continue doing more talking about ourselves per se, or the podcast itself, but definitely wanted to do something a little bit different to acknowledge the fact that we've done a year of episodes now. As this drops, it'll be our 51st episode. So we averaged almost one a week, which is pretty amazing.
We only missed like Christmas week, I think, is when we decided to being like,
Christmas and New Year's, I think, were the 2 weeks we actually missed. But yeah, that seems to be the thing when I talk to people about it, they're most impressed with is that we've actually stuck to a almost exactly weekly schedule. So part of that's just due to, there's a ton of great content out there. There's a ton of great people that have agreed to come on. And so we've been lucky enough to be able to record that much content, and we still have a list of stuff to go through in the future too.
Lately, I've had people actually reach out being like, hey, I have somebody who I think would be really great for your podcast, as opposed to us like being like, hey, who do you know? Which is really cool. So I've had people be like, oh, hey, like I know this CISO or this lawyer or this person, that I'd be happy to connect you to. So like, that's really cool because I feel like our friends within our community are really starting to being like, hey, like they have interesting stuff to talk about. And, we also have had, some of our guests that have come and like socialized with us being like, hey, I'd love to come back and I'd be happy to do that. And I enjoyed the conversation. So I'm excited because I think we should be proud of what we've done. And I'm also super excited for what's ahead. But yeah. I think you had a topic you really wanted to talk about today. So what is that?
Yeah, as we were debating about what to do for, kind of acknowledging this anniversary without making it about, look at all the things we've done. Yeah, about us, or navel gazing, as I like to put it, staring at our own belly buttons. I started kind of realizing, I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe let's talk about what we've learned and kind of how our perception of the cybersecurity industry has changed. And then I realized, wait, we've never really defined what cybersecurity is. And I don't know that we really need to, but you've done a good job of forcing us to define certain terms. Because again, one of our goals, and especially with acronyms, and phrases like buzzword bingo, where, we want to make sure that this is approachable to people that aren't in the industry or that may just be starting in the industry and want to better understand through all the buzzwordiness. So I thought maybe we talk about what cybersecurity really is. We've had a lot of conversations about security versus privacy. And I know kind of my perspective of privacy has changed as we've heard all these different answers from our guests. And maybe talk a little bit about maybe how we view the industry a little bit differently. And maybe the challenge that we gave ourselves to help make the security topic more approachable for people, maybe where we think we're at with that.
Yeah, I think I would echo that because I've had some friends and colleagues and stuff be like, oh, like what is the point of the podcast, right? Or if we're reaching out to somebody being like, hey, you want to join in? The way I continue to say is like, hey, the term cybersecurity, when most people hear it, they think it sounds scary, which is not the point at all because security matters to every single one of us in our personal lives, in our professional lives, and in just day-to-day interactions that we do with our devices, with media. And so for me, it's always been very much about being like, yeah, the goal is for us to socialize about topics within IT, compliance, security, privacy, regulatory, and really talk about it in a way that anybody within our industry, but also just within the professional community could listen in and hopefully learn a thing or two alongside the two of us, because we're both experts in our fields, but also we rely on very many other experts. I think that's the whole point. We're learning alongside some of our guests. I also think they've come to us and been like, oh, wow, I took away some things from our conversations. So it's really meant to be socializing a topic that does have a very significant barrier to entry. Even when I have people reaching out to me more on like career advice and more like mentorship, they're like, what is it about that field that compelled you to join it? And honestly, like, it wasn't one that I thought I was going to fall into, right? I thought more like, oh, tech, but tech turned into security for me. And so, it wasn't something that I pursued as a field. I just fell into it, which is a story for many of us, but it is a scary word. When you say cybersecurity, like even when I tell people, yeah, I'm a cybersecurity and privacy lawyer, they hear that and they're like, whoa, that's intense,
Yeah.
which we like need to keep talking about it because I'm like, it's not intense. It's actually not that challenging. It's more because we have this like, ooh, security is this thing that like, it stresses me out. I'm going to get in trouble. I don't want to do the wrong thing. People within our community, I think, and our like industry have very much easily been like security folks. They are separate from the rest of us.
Yeah.
And that is what we're hoping to dispel here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not necessarily the Department of No, because it's something that we all kind of have to do. So let's start with the glossary definition, if you could, Milou. Because as we were getting ready to go, she's like, I don't know, let's look up what the actual definition is. So let's start with an actual definition.
So this is the actual definition of information security, and this is from the NIST.gov US like glossary website, NIST. And information security is defined as the protection of information and information systems from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Which for me, those are a lot of buzzwords for a lot of the information security audits and standards that we use in a day-to-day. So I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I do still think if somebody had never heard of like, what is information security, if they read that, there is a lot of like text in that. And to me, it's just securing systems and securing data and figuring out how are we doing that with process policy. I'm obviously going to pull it to policy because I'm compliance, but thinking about, I do like the concept of like tying it to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but I do still think that those are very tech buzzwords that most people are like, okay, but what does that actually mean? I think we understand what confidential means. I think we all know that that means protecting like information that shouldn't be released to the public and it's meant to be held private. I think when we say integrity, I'm not sure that people necessarily would understand what that means from a non-tech lens when we're talking really about like making sure that the data is not corrupted, that it's readable, that it's usable, that it's not inaccessible, that the data stays relevant and usable.
Yeah, I would add to that is the fact that the data is not manipulated. So when you start to think about companies or even governmental entities where what is in the document is very meaningful, and even adding a word like not or changing a name in one of those documents. We've seen plenty of spy movies, for example, where the goal is to go in and plant evidence or to change something on the system that points the finger to somebody else. That is part of integrity. So making sure that your systems can't be manipulated is a big part of what goes into that.
Yeah. And then I think obviously availability is making sure that the data is accessible, right? So that for whatever reason the system's not down, you can actually use it. If it's stored in the cloud, for example, that you can actually access the information that you're hoping to store there securely. So I like that definition. I like more like concise definitions when we're trying to define things. But I do think when we talk about, there's also then, I think of like, it's the umbrella of security, which could also then impact physical security, right? Of making sure that there's locks on doors and that like systems are monitored and that the physical thing, the hardware is actually protected. Obviously, then we also have cybersecurity, which is really more focusing on like cloud and the internet and making sure that systems are secure within tech. Information security could have nothing to do with technology. It could also just be making sure that physical pieces of paper are secure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what distinguishes the information security from cybersecurity, which is a whole separate definition within the NIST glossary. There's a lot of different definitions for cybersecurity depending on which particular NIST publication you're looking at. So, not even all of NIST publications agree on exactly what the definition is, but they all more or less align with the same approach of, availability, confidentiality.
Cybersecurity is the process of protecting information by preventing, detecting, and responding to attacks. So it's pretty narrowly defined in that one.
Yeah.
And then we also have measures and controls that ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information processed and stored by a computer.
Yeah. And so computer or electronic is kind of the key difference there. But if you look at the longer definition, it introduces a few more of those kind of buzzword, what is expected type of terms. So to just call out that last part, to ensure its availability, integrity, authentication, confidentiality, and non-repudiation. So some big, heavy lawyery words in there too. The big ones being added there really is authentication. So that ability to ensure that only the right people see it and that they can get access to it through the proper mechanisms of ensuring somebody's identity. So this is, for those of us that have been doing information technology side of things, this is, setting the proper permissions. It's making sure that we're using SSO and MFA and things like that, multi-factor authentication, to make sure that the person who is logging in is the right person so that you can then have the proper authentication, the appropriate access to the right data, and make sure that, part of what we do with cybersecurity is make sure that people don't elevate their privileges, meaning they get access to things that they shouldn't. The non-repudiation word is a big, ugly word. I'm assuming, Milou, that's one that you've come across in your lawyerly duties in the past.
Not really, but again, I feel like I'm a lawyer that really tries to explain things as more as a compliance officer in a way that most people could read them, because fortunately, a word like non-repudiation, to me, I'm like, most people are like, I don't know what that means. And I don't want words that you have to like Google search. I feel like that's ineffective, especially when you're drafting contracts and stuff like that. But again, I do think it ties to the integrity of the data for that one specifically. So it's really kind of reinforcing that integrity point of making sure that it hasn't been messed with.
Yeah, it's essentially that concept of being able to know that the document hasn't been manipulated, that nobody can go be like, oh no, I didn't actually send that email. Non-repudiation is making sure that they can't come around and say that.
Yeah. I do feel like our audience can probably tell that Brian and I are both grammar nerds. So you and I both probably spend more time in dictionaries and looking up what things mean and how to use different words than most people. I think Brian is maybe even a bigger like grammar nerd than I am, which I always really respect and appreciate about it.
I've been accused of being pedantic a lot, and I don't really mind that at all because words matter and how we use words matter. And I have fallen down rabbit holes of learning about languages and whatnot.
Brian is the type of person to give edits on a policy because they're grammatically incorrect. So I would just warn anybody who works with Brian, especially on the governance side, that he will be one of your active readers of your policies, which I always love within a person. If somebody actually reads my policies that I've spent hours poring over and finessing words, and if they help me as like supportive champions of words, then I'm cool with it. But you definitely have, to be fair, I have those vibes too, where I'm like, I don't like this policy. So I am also one to tear down certain policies. Luckily, I'm usually in a position within an organization that's what I'm paid to do. But occasionally I have gotten into really heated conversations, specifically with like HR and executive teams about language and words and policies. So
to be fair, I get paid to do a lot of that kind of stuff too, just not in a legal compliance sense. In fact, day job, I'm actively going through responding to something where it's, we get to the point of tearing apart individual words and like, do we want to use word A or B here? So yeah, I appreciate a good definition and dissecting it. All of that laid out, let's talk about, in the last 51 or 50 conversations that we've had, I think we're close to about 50-50, just the two of us or one of us in a couple cases talking and the other one's talking to some sort of guest. And we've had some fun with some of these episodes, particularly recently with RSA. We've got another one that'll be coming up here after we release this particular episode. But I guess, Milou, let me just ask you the question and then you can ask it back at me is like, what have you learned about security over the last year that maybe is different than what you thought it was going in?
I think for me, I've really realized that, again, interpretation of what it means to secure systems is still vastly different for every single organization, that there is still not one size fits all. I think anytime, especially we've brought in a guest on, I've usually walked away learning something new about it, which means, again, it's a novel area of tech. It's rapidly changing. I think what we're doing of socializing with different experts and different individuals that are working in security, working in tech compliance, it's super helpful because this is definitely a space where people are willing to learn from one another because the goal is the same. We all want to secure systems. It's not necessarily of like we're being competitive because our system is more secure than the other. I like that security does still feel very much like a team sport where it's like, hey, if an organization is having success with XYZ tool or this new process or this new thing, that I do feel like within the community, it's still very like, hey, this is working for us. Like, have you guys considered this? It's still like there's a lot of knowledge sharing within the industry, which I still really like because there's other industries like law, for example, is not that way. So, when I wanted to become a lawyer and like that was the most competitive environment I've ever been in was law school, right? And like it was not a place of I learned this thing, so like let's learn together. It's not that. And I think security specifically feels even more like that than it does compliance. I think very often for compliance, if they're like, oh, this is our policy, this is our way, we're not sharing that with other people because we like built that and it works for us, which I personally don't agree with. I love the idea of like helping everybody's companies like do the right thing together. But again, I think I'm unique in that mindset. But I do think in the security mindset, at least from the conversations we've had with everybody, I do really think a lot of experts and stuff are willing to also just talk about what's working for their organization because we're all fighting malicious actors together. So everybody loses when we all have a ransomware attack. So I think, and nobody wants that. That isn't an outcome that anybody wants, especially like a successful company that's trying to do the right thing. Especially we're talking about startups, small businesses that are trying to create innovative technologies. Most of us want to see them succeed. We might be jealous of whatever package they got. We're all like, that's amazing. We all have friends that work at those companies and we want them to do well. There's nothing worse than for me, like, especially with what I do, when I get a phone call from a friend being like, oh, you won't believe what happened at our company or XYZ thing happened. Or, oh, we're dealing with lawyers and we're in the middle of a breach and it's costing us so much money. Like that sucks. I think so. For me, it's fundamentally is like security is a team sport. And if you are not sure how to handle something within your organization, feel empowered to go ask for help. And you don't necessarily have to pay for that help. That's occasionally sometimes you can ask a friend and reach out and be like, hey, do you recommend a tool or do you know somebody I could talk to? Because I think for the most part, a lot of us are willing to just share knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's if you go back and kind of look at who we've talked to from a guest perspective, most of those people aren't showing up really kind of pushing their product or the thing that they're in their day job doing. Even you and I have been pretty coy about who we work for and for the most part what we're doing day in and day out because all of the truths are universal to some extent. Now we may all come with different plans and approaches as to how we want to solve those problems. Different vendors are going to solve the problems in different ways. Different vendors are going to view the environment a little bit differently. But yeah, ultimately, that's what we all care about. When you listen to other podcasts that do more of the storytelling around cybersecurity incidents, what happened, how did the industry react? I've listened to one about the WannaCry worm that came through back in I think it was 2017 timeframe. The way that everybody kind of comes together to figure this thing out and shares information, things like the CVE database is a great example of how we all come together to make sure that everybody knows what's going on so that it can be dealt with. Because whether it's your customer getting hit or my customer getting hit, they're both going to get hit in a lot of these ways. So that camaraderie, that coming together to solve that is something I kind of already knew was out there, but I'm been pleasantly surprised at how much more it really is out there than maybe I initially thought.
Yeah, I also think within our industry, if you are thinking about getting or going into a career in security, in compliance, privacy, honestly, in tech, I think it does lend to a specific type of person that's willing to learn a lot of new stuff on a regular basis. What I spend my time doing in my day job is very different than what I spent my time doing a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like the industry is rapidly changing and it is hard to keep up. And that's something that I actually talk to with a lot of auditor friends and a lot of lawyer friends. And I'm like, man, like I haven't even had the time to look at XYZ standard, or like I don't love feeling like I'm behind. But it is very much because there's such a rapid rate of change and things that made sense 3 years ago might not work anymore. It does lend to a type of person that's like a lifelong learner, which I do think that says a lot of like the individuals that we've had. I would say every single one of them is a lifelong learner, and
Absolutely.
they'll tell you that they're like, sometimes we don't know what we're doing and we're just kind of like trying our best and asking for help and then, saying, whoops, if it went wrong.
Yeah.
We all also, I think, know we're one click away from a data breach at any point. So I think when we're all kind of in that same mindset, securing systems hopefully does become a team sport. And I do hope that we have really been pushing cultural change about saying like, hey, security is every single one of our jobs. I was on another podcast the other day and they were like, oh yeah, well, like the security team is handling security. And I was like, absolutely not. I have to correct you there right now. It is not. That's how your organization views it. You are way behind. That is the wrong way of thinking about it. Normally, if somebody says something on a podcast, you're like, but like this one, I was like, no, security is a team sport. It is not just the security folks or the compliance folks or the IT folks. If it is that way, you will fail.
Yes. Yeah. And that's been one of those other interesting things as, for example, I've been at a couple of infrastructure focused conventions lately. And part of my company's talk track is cybersecurity. And when I mention those cybersecurity things in that context, it's usually and we also have these features. And almost everybody I talk to is like, oh, well, I would like to talk about those security features. I don't want to know just about the infrastructure pieces because those are cool and those are great. But when I go back, if I want to sell this, I need to know those security stories. I need to know what my security team is constantly asking me about what security features of other products we have, because a product that does backup and replication, for example, that's taking data from production systems and storing it someplace so that they can then be resurrected someday if necessary, which is a huge piece of the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example, is recovery is the fifth of six different, or you could look at it as the sixth too, but it's kind of the backstop. It's everything else fails, you need to be able to recover your data. That is a huge part of security, but security teams haven't always in the past, I guess, look at it that way. But they are more and more now looking at that as a key piece. They may not be taking on the primary ownership of that, and I don't think they want to, but working with the infrastructure team to make sure that when and if they need to come and say, we had a cyber incident, we need to recover, that infrastructure team, that infrastructure component is ready to go, is ready to provide them what they need. And so it very much is becoming something that infrastructure as a whole is definitely adopting, I guess, or being cognizant of. I think a lot of the more data management side of things as well, when you talk about DBAs and you talk about people that might be in charge in a company of a particular business application, business owners, they're becoming more aware of it too. They want to talk about those things because, again, whether their focus is on the front end authentication, authorization side of things, but also the side of recovery piece of things. They realize that they've got some very sensitive data sometimes that needs to be protected, and that protection has to happen on multiple levels. And we've heard some of that in some of the conversations, and we've definitely been talking to some people about coming in and talking about database security or other places. I mean, we had David Klee on before that he talked about that directly, but that's an area of interest for me still, because that's an area that in the past I've done, but recently haven't had much of a chance to there. I would say one of the other things that has been a learning experience for me that, again, I kind of always knew, which is that the buzzword aspect of things, that there's a lot of acronyms, that there's a lot of terms that actually make it difficult. And I've learned that as I've made more of a pivot into cybersecurity. And Milou, I really appreciate you calling me out on a lot of those when I dump those words out in front of everybody to make sure that doesn't become a barrier for people. That, when I say DLP and you say, what does that mean? That, I can explain what data loss prevention is and how it fits into the environment, because we do get into this kind of fast forward mode of talking about things that requires us to use shorthand. And this is true in anywhere, in any language.
You also use a lot of buzzwords in your day job. So I think you're like a special case where if you don't know the buzzwords, your audience might be like, what? Like they're expecting you to use those words because they're coming to you for a specific solution, or they're really looking for those particular things. I think I really try to, this is probably where I'm more of the grammar police, I think, on the podcast with acronyms and definitions. But I remember what it was like when I was completely new to the tech field, of feeling so confused and being in meetings with software engineers and developers, and they were speaking at such a level that I was like, man, I really want to keep up with them, but they're using terms that I'm not familiar with. And it's really not a fun place to be if you're responsible for helping them come up with a solution to secure their systems, or to come up with a path for privacy by design. If you're like, shoot, I don't know exactly what they're talking about, that's not a fun feeling. Nobody likes to feel that way at work. I think that's not just like our industry thing. I think that's why I try to step back and be like, hey, DLP is data loss prevention. What actually is that, right? So it's not only we're really trying to talk about it as like, okay, what is ransomware in the sense of like, actually, let's step out and like give examples so that like anybody could walk away and understand like it's similar to like being held ransom. Oh, your data is being held ransom, right? Also, just, I ironically this week am in the midst of doing a lot of my continual legal education trainings. So in the meantime, I'm also doing a lot of work. And one of them, fortunately, was about training lawyers for cybersecurity, which was fun for me to listen to because it was effectively like a security training for lawyers. And it was still very much focused on like the human element behind security, which I still think is like a useful thing to remind people. When we're talking about the human element of cybersecurity, it is still a reality that 95% of cybersecurity attacks are triggered by a human, are triggered by a click, are triggered by somebody making a mistake. So like the human element portion of it is still why training is so important. And I consider hopefully people listening to our podcast as a part of the training. Think about it for ISO 27001. There's specific requirements to be listening to resources and different technologies. And how is your compliance and security team staying abreast of different changes? Listening to our podcast could be a really fun example for that, actually, as like great audit evidence. Hey, I'm like, it's a shameless plug, but this is the type of documentation I would rather have a security team be like, hey, in the meantime, like go ahead and listen to this episode and maybe talk about it, or have a discussion about it. It's way more exciting than some of the security trainings we've taken. Like usually we all just breeze through it. But I think for me also with what I do, I partner and work with a lot of small businesses. And it's still really wild when I'm talking to certain companies that are doing really, really innovative things. They have nothing. It's not even like, oh, we have a baseline. It's, oh, shoot, we are like wanted to get cyber insurance and realized we don't have any infrastructure in place. We don't have any technology securing our systems. And we are not only like a click away, like we're not even sure our laptops are encrypted, right? So that's still the case in 2025. I'm still seeing organizations have incredibly immature programs where they're, just kind of hoping that they have passwords on their laptops. And that's still the case, right? And these are companies that have big budgets, that are doing really exciting things and should not fall victim to an attack, but are also not investing enough in thinking about like, oh, we need security. And I think that's very often for a lot of companies, they think they're too small, or they're like, oh, that's something we'll invest in when we have 10 people or 20, whatever it is. But it's still so important for talking about 95% of the attacks. And I still think a huge majority of the attacks are hitting small businesses. And I don't think I see that enough in the news because, of course, we see like the largest data breaches in the news, right? Where millions of users are affected. Small businesses, I think, are the ones that are cashing in the most actually on their cyber insurance.
Yeah, and that's not surprising because we currently have a model of startups being move fast, break things, fix them quick, which I personally really don't like because it becomes a model that while if we're building a system individually, only we're consuming that type of system, then that's okay because we're only causing ourselves pain. But it's not a great user experience, especially if it involves, sensitive data that we wouldn't want leaking, that we wouldn't want to get out. Because if I'm selling to somebody and let's break things fast, they're not paying attention to security because they're putting their efforts into features and functionality. And if I'm giving them a credit card for something and they're not properly protecting that, now it's going to hurt me as one of their customers in a very visceral way that I don't like.
I think I have to speak up for the small business owners on that one, just because I am a small business owner. And I will say, I think even for business owners, money is the most important thing for them when they're starting up. So getting the deals, getting contracts, getting paid is so important that, yes, security does feel like a back ops thing that they're like, oh, when I have time, I'll invest in this. Or, oh, when I get XYZ deal, like, we're going to get MDM in place. I think a lot of them are thinking about it as like, it's the next thing that's coming. They just don't have the time. That doesn't mean it's not important. It absolutely is. And a lot of them, I think, are hoping that they'll get by until it becomes a thing. But I will say, I also get it though, because like I was chatting with a friend of mine. He's got a really exciting idea for a startup and he's building it, but it requires PHI. And so he was coming to me kind of as being like, hey, like, what are some of the things that my team needs to be thinking about if we want to secure health information? I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So you really need to be thinking about making sure that all of the providers that you're getting, right? Like any of the software tools they need to be able to build what they want to build is HIPAA compliant. That generally comes at a premium cost. And so if you're now telling a startup who has no funding, who doesn't have existing customers yet, that not only do they have to pay for technology, but they have to pay for more expensive technology, that's a really, really tough pill to swallow. But for them, it's a bit of the chicken and the egg, where it's like, if you don't pay for the higher security systems, you will not get the health customers that you want because they can't put information in your system. But it is still a really hard thing where to them, I was actually like, hey, you really might want to create a business plan and actually go for a small business loan and try to figure out if that's how you could do that for them, because there are vehicles in place to help companies do this. But it is hard because a lot of the more secure systems cost more money.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's somewhat by design, I guess, because it becomes something that is worth paying more for. And it's kind of,
I don't totally agree with that.
well, I don't either. And that's where I was going to go next, is that we need to get to more of a space where some of those types of things, like who's going to deal with health data that isn't HIPAA compliant? So those things just need to be the default. Security needs to be a default feature. It needs to be something that everybody has access to. And that becomes the challenge for those small businesses, that isn't the case right now. And that things like, to your point, compliance programs aren't free unless they can do it based on a bunch of podcasts that people are putting out to the world for free for some reason. And having that capability just be the default, to be rather than being a cost center. And we've had this conversation with guests in the past. We need to not look at security as a cost center, but as something that truly enables the business to be better, and therefore is a partner to the business, is a partner in the delivery of whatever the business is there to do. And, being able to say we're HIPAA compliant when you're selling to customers and asking for their healthcare information, like, you have to have that. Like, that's an enablement to the business, not a cost to the business. And unfortunately, we as an industry just quite aren't there yet.
No, for sure. Like for me, please, as a just like shout out to companies creating technologies within our industry, please, please, please stop putting single sign-on behind a paywall. Like, please,
Yes.
absolutely. Like, this is not something that I think also for your security, like it's better for everybody if it's an SSO, if that's the identity and access management solution that they've decided. Just for those that are not technically, like not usually procuring software, make sure that you ask if single sign-on is included, or ask them if that's something that they can add at the lower level, because sometimes that is something that salespeople can actually give you because it's already configured. That's the one that I struggle with, where I'm like, it's actually honestly probably more burdensome for the technology provider to actually start cherry picking who gets SSO versus not, as opposed to just being like, de facto, we're giving this to everybody because it's the right thing to do. So like, please, if you are building technology, stop putting SSO behind paywalls, because it's limiting the security practices for everybody involved. It's less secure for the technology provider. It's less secure for the customer. Like, please, that is going to be my ask for the community.
Yeah.
Stop putting SSO behind paywalls.
Yes. And other things like MFA and role-based authentication, those types of things. One other thing that I wanted to touch on is directly related to early conversations we had when we were just trying to decide how to deal with this podcast, was you wanted to ask that question about privacy versus security. And I love that. It's created some really great content and some really thought-provoking things for both us and our guests. Sometimes the conversation is even more interesting on the back end than it is on the recording, but it's
Because they're
definitely
usually like, oh, I really had to think about that one.
yeah. And to be fair, we warn them about the question, and some of them prepare and some of them don't. And that's fine. Everybody's got a different style, but it's definitely a very thought-provoking thing. And so through these episodes and hearing multiple different conversations on there, privacy is another one of those things where it's like, I feel like everybody kind of just knows it. And I don't really want us to read a textbook definition of privacy, because we have gotten so many different definitions that really, I think even more important than having a black and white definition of it is the different ways that you can define it. And the fact that, we say this pretty much every interview, is that everybody thinks about privacy differently. Everybody has their own definitions and their own requirements for being quote unquote private. And I think that's the important part about that one, is that it is closely related to security, and it does require security. But what one person considers privacy is kind of different than the next person. And that's been really interesting to see that kind of develop through all these conversations, and highly recommend people go back. Milou, I think you had a lot of fun editing that 2-episode arc of just replaying all the privacy versus security questions that kind of consolidate those all into one short thought track for everyone to listen to.
Yeah, I think it has been affirming for me to hear that everybody's definition of privacy is different. I mean, Brian and I, the two of us, have a different definition of what to keep private versus not. And so that does make it really challenging for companies to create privacy programs that everybody's happy with. There is literally never going to be a privacy program that every single person is happy with, because each of us have a different interpretation of what information is important to us, what information deserves to be kept private, what information we might be like, I don't really care about that as much, or like, hey, I'm okay with sharing that with this person, but not that person, because I trust this person more than I do that person, right? We all have those friends that, like, one friend we can tell a secret to and we know they're a vault, versus the other friend you have that moment being like, pretty sure
Yeah.
everybody else is going to hear about this. So we have this already just as human beings. We know like how to trust our instincts of what we want to keep secure, or I guess keep private. I do think we need to be more mindful about when we're trusting companies or trusting third parties with our personal information, of do we actually trust those companies to keep it private? And for me, my de facto is no, I don't actually trust most companies to keep my information private. Unfortunately, I know that my data is probably more valuable to them as unsecure as possible, because it helps them sell me more things. Ultimately, it helps them. Like, that's just the reality for me. So I really do still play the game of how little information can I give companies now. And I do just want to continue to task our audience. Try to have fun with it. Do your regular things of like, please go in and check your Amazon and see how many addresses they have, how many old credit cards they have. Like, clean that stuff up. Consider that just part of like managing your Amazon account, or Target, Walmart, whatever it is you're using, your grocery store, whatever it is. Because I'm now in the mindset of, I trust people to keep my information private for the most part. I don't necessarily trust service providers to keep my information private, also because I know that they're incentivized not to do so. And that means that we really have to have a personal, I guess, journey of what does it look like to keep our information private? What does that mean? That sucks. I wish it weren't the case. I wish we could trust everybody implicitly. There are still absolutely certain companies that put privacy first, and those are companies that I actively invest in and use.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're not going to slip up and make, and also change, that like times can change. So I would push each and every one of us to think about giving companies less information possible, but enough that you still get what you're looking for from those services. Because it would be a bummer if also, like, because you're so privacy minded, you can't enjoy XYZ thing.
Mhm.
There has to be balance.
Yeah, and there's tricks you can use. I will go to sites, and rather than give every site my credit card, I'm using the digital payment services, an Apple Pay, a Google Pay, a PayPal, whatever those might be, to try to reduce the blast radius of my credit card itself. Um, to me, that's how I view those things. I don't always like those particular services, but they do give me a bit of a separation in that regard. Um, so yeah, it's definitely helped me evolve how I approach that. I play that same game too. My own paranoia sometimes comes out in dark ways on some of these episodes, but that's because I do think about a lot about how inappropriately data can be used, and making sure that it gets minimized so that it can't be weaponized, if you will. So with that, I think we'll wrap up this episode. It really is an everybody's game. I feel like we're doing good here. I hope everyone else feels that way. Definitely encourage any of you that are listening, not having a lot of background in cybersecurity or compliance or any of those other fields, to let us know what you would like to hear more of. Call us out if we get too buzzwordy, if we talk about things and not explain what they are, because those are great episodes for us to plan. And quite frankly, I'm actually kind of happy when we don't necessarily talk to the expert in this particular field, because they can help us define what we should be talking about better.
Well, sometimes we have a hard time getting our experts to talk about it at an entry point level. We
That can be
spend more
tough
of the
too.
episode being like, could you explain that at like a more
Yeah.
basic level? Because they're so technical and they're so in it every single day that they know exactly. So I think sometimes we actually struggle more when we have like true experts in their field, because it's like, hey, wait. But like, could you explain it to your neighbor?
Yeah.
Could you explain it to a friend? Could you step back and actually, because they, I think, value us as experts, which I appreciate, but also sometimes it does make it harder for us to have episodes at that really like, we want to talk about this at a high level. We don't want to get in the weeds.
Yep. 100%. So appreciate you all for listening, whether you've been listening for this is your first episode that you listen to, or if you've been listening to the other 50 episodes, or watching on YouTube for that matter too, because you have the choice. You can watch us talk, or you could just listen to us talk. I don't have a preference one way or the other which one you do. Yeah. Yeah. The biggest thing for us is that whether you do it through comments or you email us at info@socializingsecurity.com or hit us up on LinkedIn. Any of those are very valid, and we will be watching and listening to all of those. Yeah. Help us out with this next year as we start in on our second year, and we want you to be a part of this journey with us. So appreciate you all.
Thanks for socializing security with us.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.